Hello, dear friends, dear visitors of my YouTube channel. My name is Adrian Harsim, and I would like to share with you some thoughts about the importance of language learning. Because there are so many languages in the world, but every year they are disappearing. Like there used to be many more languages, and now there are very few of them remaining compared to what it used to be. And the trend is getting worse and worse, and soon there will probably remain even fewer languages than there are now. And English language is one of the languages which is actually endangering those other languages, because many people in third world countries, right, they are switching to English, and also to some other like big languages like French, Russian, even Chinese, many other like big languages, right? And small languages are getting very endangered, and later it will be very difficult to uh, revive them, right? Even though there have been some examples like that, like for example with the Hebrew language, which was revived after so many years, but it wasn't like a completely dead language, because it was used a lot in religious life of Jewish people, right? And even though the pronunciation got distorted mainly by the German language, right? Because, for example, this R sound, right? It used to be more like in Arabic language or other Semitic languages, like rolling R, like R. But now it's more like in German language, like R, right? So, and yeah, languages are changing all the time, but I would like to encourage those who speak smaller languages to preserve their languages, because languages are a very important inheritance of every people, right, of every ethnic group. And it is very important to preserve a language while it still exists than to revive it later. So, why languages are important? Languages are a means of communication. It's only one side of them, right? But they are also means uh, of culture, right? Like they're a part of culture of every ethnic group, right? And if language disappears, and if uh, like you can pretend to act as the same people, like imagine that, for example, Mongolians start speaking English. Yeah, they can still ride horses like in a traditional way, they can hunt, they can prepare food like mare milk, right, like horse milk. And but still it's not going to be the same, right, as it used to be. So it's very important to preserve the cultural diversity, same way as we are trying to preserve the animal diversity, right? There are so many. It's a big tragedy when a species of I don't know, some horse or some I don't know, snakes or some other species of animals, when they disappear, it's a tragedy, right? But it's also a big tragedy when an ethnic group disappears, right? And disappears its language, its culture, its way of looking at the world, right? So it's yeah, so it's better to keep those languages alive, right? And that's why I started this channel, to teach people that it's possible to learn languages quite easily. So if I learn foreign languages, then people can also try to revive their own language if it's on its way to disappearance, right? So, and it's very interesting to learn languages. So don't just learn your own language, learn other languages, because as a person who speaks many languages, I noticed that also the way of thinking, the way of looking at problems is also affected by the language in which you think, right? So if you can think in many languages, if you can formulate problems in many languages, you can actually look at those problems from different points of view. Yes, and how, but for English people, it's probably very difficult to study foreign languages because English language is so dominant that English speaking people expect that English should be understood in every country they travel to, right? So no matter where they go to Egypt, to Zimbabwe, to Ethiopia, to India, to China, to Japan, they always expect that there must be someone who understands English language, right? But it's a little bit detrimental because it's for language learning, because if you don't have a stimulus, right, to learn languages, so why would you learn it? But learning languages is very good because if you speak with a person who speaks your language in another country, like for example, if you go to Japan or to China or to Brazil, I don't know, and you speak in English, right? And people who speak with you in English, they already like treat you more like at a distance, right? They understand you're a foreigner. They just want to show their country from maybe a better side of it, right? And yeah, there is some barrier, right, between you and those people. But when you can speak their own language, they already like get more relaxed. They speak more openly. They share with you better, like all their local concerns, etc. So it's much easier, right? And you can also understand what they're talking to each other, right? And you can understand better their culture, their mentality, their everyday issues, right? Like you're not like eavesdropping, but you just like listen, like for example at a table when you're talking to people from a foreign country and everyone joins the discussion and they talk one to another, right? And when they speak in their own language, they understand that you can understand them, right? But still, they talk more openly to one to another because it's their own language, right? Yes, and so it's very important to learn languages, as I already explained, but how do we learn languages, right? Actually, it's very good if your language is similar to some other languages, right? Like, for example, Italian is similar to Spanish, to Portuguese, to French, to Romanian, right? So for Italians, it would be easier to learn one of those languages because it's all of one language group, right? The Romance languages. And English language is also a part of a group. It belongs to the Germanic languages, and those languages are like German, Swedish, Norwegian, Dutch, right? Those kind of languages. But English is already a little bit more distant because it has lots of borrowings from the French language, right? Due to the Norman conquest, right? There was this event in English history when England was conquered by Normans who were at that time already French speaking. Originally they were like Scandinavians, right? But they got assimilated into French culture, right, in Normandy, and after at the time they were conquering England, they were already speaking French. That's why in the modern English language there are like probably 30% or even more, depending on the usage, right? Like in everyday language maybe less, in more scientific language more, but around like 1/3 of words in English language are of French and Latin origin, because French is itself of Latin origin, right? To a significant degree, mostly, not to a significant, but to a very significant degree, is a descendant of Latin, right? And that's why in modern English there are lots of words of Latin origin, right? And that's why it's more difficult for modern Englishmen and Americans and British in general. got it into wrong in a wrong order for English and for the British in general, as well as for Americans, Canadians, Australians, and all other English speakers. It's more difficult to learn, for example, German, because the German language is much more complex. It's still in the closer to the original version of those Germanic languages. But English got more simplified because lots of foreigners like Normans and Celts, right, they were learning that Germanic language, and they were like dropping out cases and some grammatical features, right, and that's why English language got more simplified. And if a language is simple, has a simpler grammar, has like a simpler vocabulary, right? Then it's more difficult to go and learn that original language, which was much more complex, right? So I think for Germans it would be easier to learn English than for English to learn German, right? But the English speaking people, they have an advantage that they can learn, for example, learn Italian or French, right, or Spanish easier, because in English language there are also so many words of French and Latin origin, right? So they already know lots of vocabulary from those languages, even though the grammar is different, but vocabulary is similar, right? So in English, for English people, it's easier to learn lots of vocabulary out of those languages, right? It's like already for granted that you know it, right? Like for example, in Italian it's differiti, right? And in English it's different. In German it's verschieden, right? So for Englishmen it's easier to learn the Italian word, right? And yes, and but still it's a very, even though for English people it's difficult, it's still very useful to learn other languages, because if you learn another language, then it's you can think in this language, you can look at the various problems from different points of views, right? You can understand better the mentality of another nation, right? And then every nation has its own achievements, has its own mentality, so it's better to be able to look at problems from different mindsets, right? So how do we study languages, right? It's very advisable to start learning languages from a very early age, as early as possible, right? So, for example, my mother used to be an English language teacher, right? And so she taught me English when I was almost a baby, a toddler, right? And she started teaching me German and Polish, right? And Russian and all kinds of other languages, because she was also multilingual. Probably she spoke like 5 languages or so, right? And and I got that interest, right? And also it maybe trained my ear to listen to different sounds, right? To understand like many other words, right? To expand my vocabulary. And then when you expand your vocabulary, then it's easier to learn every new word, right? Because language learning is not like linear, right? It's like a geometric function, right? So the more you learn, the faster you start to learn later on, right? So if after you learn 5 languages, then every next language is much easier to learn, right? Because even by coincidence, every new word in a new language is already similar to a word in a previous language, right? Even if a meaning is totally different, it sounds very similar or same, right? And then you can easily remember it, right? Like for example, sometimes even even origins of the word can be same, right? Not just coincidence, but can be like similarity due to common origin. Like for example, in Japanese, right, there is a word namae, and it means name, right? In English, you think, oh, it's probably a coincidence, right? Like how can there be like a same word for the same concept, right? In two so distant languages, right? The Japanese language formed like so many years ago, and English language also formed like centuries ago, right? When those two countries were not in contact. So how could this language have the same origin? But actually, there is this same origin, because in the Japanese language, this word got borrowed from the Sanskrit, right? And Sanskrit is an Indo-European language, just as English is, right? And that's how this same root, same old Indo-European root, got borrowed or by the Japanese, right, from Sanskrit, and also got preserved in English as a because English is also an Indo-European language, right? And that's why it's actually same word, just pronounced a little bit different in Japanese and in English, right? So many languages are much more similar than we think, right? Or for example, many words from Latin or from Greek, right? They are used in many Western languages, like all of European languages basically, or many words from Arabic are used in Central Asian languages, or even in Indonesian, right? Like for example, the word some like more I wouldn't say complex word, but more like important words, right? Are similar in the Tatar language in the Central Russia, right? And in Indonesian, for example, right? Jawab, and it comes from the word in Arabic, right, which means answer. Or many other like political or some philosophical or some more like complex cultural terms. They are coming from Arabic, right? For example, in those languages. Just as like in Western languages, many such words come from Latin, right? Like location, right? In English, you can say lokacja in Polish, right? You can say locazione in Italian, right? Because all of those languages have borrowed this word from Latin. So it's very useful if you find similarities between your language and a language you are trying to learn. Also, it's very important not to be afraid to practice to speak a language, right? So as soon as you learn about like 500 or 600 words, you understand some grammar basics, and you can already start speaking in that language. No problem, and just remember to speak fast at a normal pace. Don't try to say everything very perfectly grammatically, because this slows you down, right? And if you're speaking correctly but very slowly, people like start losing attention. They get impatient. They get tired. They don't want to listen any longer, right? But if you speak even with some errors, if you speak not very correctly, but you speak confidently, you speak fast, you speak fluently, even though with some errors, right? Then people are listening actually to what you are saying and not to how you are saying it, right? So just be confident, right? And start speaking a foreign language as soon as you learn some basics, right? Also, it's very important to keep practicing it. Like, for example, I already recorded several other videos in other languages, and I noticed that at first, when I tried to record some languages, I noticed that I started to forget them, right? So I had to like listen for like an hour or two to some transmissions in those languages on the internet, right? And then I got like started to think again in those languages, and after that I could record those videos, right? So it's always very important to practice at least time to time, right? And yeah, and keep your language in shape. Also, it is very important to use like different ways, right, to learn languages, to watch TV, to listen to radio, to read books, to whatever, talk to people, right? And this way, like, you can feel more confident that you can use your language like everywhere, like in reading and listening and speaking, right? So yeah, it's also very, very important. Sorry. Yeah, and what else can I add? Yeah, and there are also many other different ways to practice your language. For example, I found it useful to go to a website called Bible.com, and there are like 2,600 different versions of Bible, right? And many of them have in different various languages, right? But some languages have several translations, so I think it's not 2,000 languages, but probably like several hundred languages. Many of those languages, they also have audio recordings, and those speakers are very perfectly pronouncing everything. They are native speakers. They have perfect accents, perfect intonations, etc. So you can read and simultaneously listen, right? So you can understand like if your pronunciation is correct or not, like what should you change in your pronunciation. And if you know text very well, you don't have to check dictionary all the time, because if you know the text and if you listen to this text in a foreign language and you, for example, don't understand like 2 words out of 7, but you know the meaning of this text, right? And so you can guess easily, and you do not have to waste time to check those words in a dictionary. And then you recognize them next time, right? And you understand more and more and more. And then you understand very perfectly whatever you listen, right? Like, for example, I am listening now in Persian language and in Arabic language, and I understand already almost everything, but still have some difficulty speaking. But I guess like in a very short time I will also record some videos in those languages as well. Yeah, and it's very good to also be able to speak languages, because when you, for example, travel to different countries and you speak to people in their own languages and you make them happy, right? And it doesn't cost you anything, right? And you can just make someone's day, right? Like to make someone feel happy, and someone will like remember that, right, for many years maybe to come, that oh, my language is so rare, like not so many foreigners know it, but I once met someone who could speak my language, right? So for like you probably, as English person, you probably don't understand this, right? Because everyone is expected to speak English, right? But in some smaller countries, like for example, or even people without their own country, being an ethnic group inside another state, right, and no one is learning their language, so they really appreciate it. And even if it's a big country, right, but the language is not very popular internationally, like for example the Japanese language or the Chinese language, right, and if they see that a foreigner can speak their language, they feel happy, right? And it's very good when you can make other people happy, because if you make others happy, then you also feel happy as well. Yes, and yeah, so basically please try to implement all the advices that I've given you in this video, right? And this video is already pretty long and will take some time to upload, so I think yeah, that's time to finish it. And I think I will record some other videos also in English and in other languages, so if you still speak only English, you can listen to this program, right? But if you already speak other languages, you can also listen to other languages, right? And the videos will not be identical, so now maybe they are similar because these are just introductory videos, but later I will speak about many other different topics, because languages are not my only hobby. I also like history, I like travel, I've been to like 44 countries, right? So I have many memories which I can share with you. Yeah, and also you can show this video to your friends and to encourage them to learn language, that it's possible to learn many languages, right? You just have to try. You don't have to study a lot every day. I'm studying like maybe 20 minutes on average, right, every day, but see, with the time it accumulates. As I told you, it's not linear, it's geometrical, right? The more you learn, the faster the learning gets. Okay, and thank you very much for your attention and have a nice day. Wish you all the best.